Bay Area Air Quality Management District and Valero on an update on their ongoing issues surrounding a hydrogen vent pipe. And I just want to say that for the process, for the public, we're going to hear a presentation from the Air Quality District, and then we will take public comment. And then at the end of that, we will hear from Valero, who will make a statement. And many of you were on a call last week that the Air District had with interested Benicia residents about this issue. And I want to thank the Air District staff. This meeting went beyond the planned 2 hour to 4 hours, and they answered every question, including multiple questions from several residents. And so this time, I'm certainly hopeful it's not going to go 4 hours. We're not going to have a direct back and forth with either the Air District or Valero. And so the public comment will come between the two presentations, and we certainly want to hear the public comments. The council will be listening, certainly, and they may want to redirect questions back to either agency as a result of some of these public comments. So with that, let's open it up, and we'll introduce Mr. Damian Breen, who is the Deputy Chief Executive Officer for the Bay Area Air Quality Management District. Mr. Breen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you to the council members for having us here tonight. At the Air District, we spend a lot of time listening to, partnering with, and working for our communities. Through that work, we hear concerns and hopes about how the district can be more transparent, open, and vigilant in our inspection, investigation, enforcement action against companies who negatively impact human health and the environment here in the Bay Area. People have told us things like, we need the Air District to crack down on violators. We need more information about what is found in your investigations, how what you find impacts our health, and what actions are you taking to stop these companies from polluting. And we've been told that we need to hold companies accountable for their actions and stop allowing them to put profit before people. Later, as part of my presentation, I will discuss specifically some of the things we heard from the citizens of Benicia as part of that 4-hour meeting the Mayor referenced that we had with them last week. That feedback, the relationships we have with our communities, and the concerns that people are raising about how we do our work are all things that we take very seriously. And that's why I'm here this evening. I'm hoping to demonstrate that we are taking steps to do things differently at the Air District. And we are hoping that we can also meet the call for full transparency that we've heard from you, the City Council, from your community, and from others as we work to protect those here in the Bay Area. To do this, we're committing to using all of the tools at our disposal, including bringing cases to the Air District's hearing board, which brings us to the purpose of tonight's briefing. The Valero Benicia refinery is being taken to the Air District's independent hearing board on March 15, 2022. This action is to end a serious emissions violation related to an undisclosed pollution source at the facility. An Air District investigation found an unreported emission source at Valero that vented 10,000 tons of hydrocarbons over several years, and this release included toxic air pollutants. Those emissions exceeded Air District regulatory limits, and it is never okay to exceed an emission standard, and it's never okay to hide those emissions. And we believe that this community would say the same. So we think it's time we moved on from the old ways of doing things through prolonged negotiations with the emitters to now taking formal legal action in the public forum that will require the abatement of these excess emissions. I will tell you more specifics about this case this evening and hopefully answer all of your questions about it. Getting to this point where we'll take Valero to our hearing board has been a journey of change and learning for the Air District. We've used our hearing board process very few times over the last 20 years, and we think it's time that that changed. Some of this journey has been slow and difficult for us as an organization, and we believe that in order to make real change, it takes commitment to act differently. We've tried working with Valero through internal negotiations, and in truth, some progress was made. Emissions were reduced at the site, but not eliminated. We've also had to look at our internal processes, and while we're grateful to the Air District staff who diligently worked to find this violation, we should have done better, and we should have done better sooner. Going forward, we're committed to doing better and to be held to account for our actions in the hope of earning the trust of our communities. We know that we've got work to do, and we're hopeful that by doing things differently, we'll be able to increase our transparency and effectiveness so that we can better serve and protect you, our community. So now, with your permission, Your Honour, I'll go into a brief presentation about the specifics of this case. Next slide, please. So this evening, I'll give you a brief overview of the refinery facility, talk about the emissions violation we discovered, our investigation, and a partial fix that has been put in place before I close with the current status of the event and a discussion about some of what we heard at our public meeting last week. Next slide, please. So Valero was built in 1969. It's an integrated facility, which means that each part of the process flows into the unit next to it. And as such, pieces of the process cannot be easily operated independently without shutting down the entire facility. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's important later on. In terms of the size of the facility, it's one of 5 refineries here in the Bay Area, and it processes approximately 165,000 barrels of crude oil a day. That's roughly equivalent to 7 million gallons of crude oil per day. In terms of what we regulate there, we have storage tanks, emission sources, abatement devices, including the 3 flares, emission point sources, and then a spaghetti or forest of thousands of valves, flanges, pumps, and connectors, all of which have Air District emission limits. Next slide, please. So here in the picture on the left, you see the vent pipe, which is the source of the emissions we'll be discussing tonight. On the right, you see where the pipe sits approximately in relation to the facility and the community. And those of you who are eagle-eyed will also notice that there's a steam plume coming from the vent itself in the picture on the left. And that steam was a complicating factor in the identification of this emission source that I'll discuss with you later. Next slide, please. So relative to this emissions point, the Air District believes that it was in existence as far back as 2000 when Valero acquired the facility. Valero began sampling emissions from this source as far back as 2003 for its production purposes. And even though the facility had multiple chances to come forward to report and minimize these emissions, it failed to do so. In fact, an exhaustive search of our permitting applications for this facility show no declaration of the existence of this emissions point, which led to the incorrect assumption that it was just a steam vent. In reality, this vent was emitting approximately 4,000 pounds of hydrocarbon per day, thousands of pounds over the limit in Air District regulations. Based on Valero and Air District samples taken for this vent, we estimate the total emissions from this source to be between 2003 and 2020 to be over 10,000 tons of hydrocarbons, which included 138 tons of toxic air contaminants, specifically the compounds benzene, ethylbenzene, toluene, and xylene. At the public meeting the other night, your community asked us what other chemicals were included in the hydrocarbon fraction of the emissions, and those compounds were primarily 65% butane, 18% propane, 11% pentane, with lesser percentages of ethane and propylene. At the time the Air District discovered these emissions, we did a health risk assessment to determine if there was any indicated impacts on the community that would require the facility to install controls per our regulations. And while the Air District's modelling is used to determine what needs to be done to protect those most vulnerable to pollution, including children, our tools cannot tell us whether people actually became sick from exposure as a result of these emissions. Factors that influence health outcomes that are not included in our emissions tools include how much you were exposed to, the duration of that exposure, what your general health, age and lifestyle are. But the results of our modelling did show projected cancer health risk and acute health hazard risk numbers in excess of the limits where the facility would have had to control these regulations or these emissions under Air District regulation. Finally, while the Air District has determined the nature and extent of these releases, we're not medical or human health experts. Therefore, the Air District has provided its data to the Solano County Public Health Department for their review. And at our meeting on February 24th, Dr. Matthias, the County Health Officer, was asked about the health impacts from these emissions. And while I don't want to put words in his mouth, he did state at that particular time it was impossible to tell what had happened as a result of these emissions historically, but he could not rule out health impacts from these emissions in the Benicia community. Next slide, please. Okay, so now a little bit about the investigation that took us to this point. In December 2018, the Air District received a report from another refinery where a control vent had released to the atmosphere. As a result, the Air District launched an investigation into all 5 Bay Area refineries to see if similar events existed at those facilities. By March of 2019, it was determined that Valero had an unreported and uncontrolled vent, and at that point, the Air District issued a notice of violation to the facility to cease those emissions. All the while continuing at the same time to investigate other issues associated with this release. As a result of the violation, Valero proposed an engineering fix seeking to remedy the emissions releases. By October of 2019, that fix was in place and the Air District and Valero continued to monitor the vent to see if the emissions issue had indeed been fixed. By May of 2020, it became clear that the emissions had not been mitigated, but continued during startup, shutdown, and malfunction periods. And since that time, we've seen a number of proposals for additional fixes by Valero, but none, in our opinion, solve the emissions problem, and that's why the Air District is taking Valero to its hearing board. Next slide, please. So where are we with the emissions from this vent today? So while the initial engineering fix reduced hydrocarbon emissions substantially, the facility is still emitting enough during startup, shutdown, and malfunctions to exceed limits in Air District regulations that require controls to protect public health. Next slide, please. Here you see areas in Benicia in red and yellow where emissions exceed the thresholds in Air District regulations that require Valero to install controls. Again, these are modeled emissions representing a worst case scenario and do not indicate actual health impacts. But what is clear is that action is needed to bring this facility into compliance. Next slide, please. This action will occur on March 15, 2022, when the Air District will request a stipulated order of abatement at its hearing board. The stipulated order is targeted only at eliminating the emissions violation, and the Air District's investigation into reporting and permitting issues associated with this release is still ongoing. The stipulated order of abatement will bind Valero to eliminating these emissions as soon as feasible, but no later than the next refinery turnaround. And in order to cure this situation, the facility will require Air District permits and may also require analysis under the California Environmental Quality Act and or require city building permits. In the interim, the Air District will continue to monitor emissions from this vent, and any additional emissions and the cost of the final fix will be factored into the penalty for this violation. So finally, next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little about what we heard from your community at an informational meeting we had last week. A recording for that meeting will be online shortly, and I strongly advise the members of the council here to take a look at it so that you can understand the stress, fear, and frustration expressed by the attendees. I'm also going to apologize to those attendees before I begin this summary. This is my take on what we heard at the meeting, and in no way represents a comprehensive retelling of the comments we heard from the community. But in Benicia, you have an engaged, intelligent, and well-informed group of citizens who had questions about why this violation was not caught earlier, what the health impacts of these emissions were, why did the monitoring network surrounding this facility not pick up those emissions, how did the extensive Air District presence at the facility not detect this vent, how can the community help to monitor the facility in real time, and when will the Air District's community monitor be operational? They also wanted to know what the danger to the community and their children were from the facility and its repeated releases. They wanted to know why they were not informed about this violation for so long. They also had questions about whether the facility would be prosecuted for a negligent criminal or other charges, and how the Air District was working with the US EPA, the California Air Resources Board, the California Attorney General, or the Solano County District Attorney. They wanted to know and asked repeatedly how much the facility would be fined and who will get the penalty money, and how the Air District will keep the community informed about future emissions violations at the facility. Whose responsibility is it to tell residents what actions to take to protect themselves during events at the facility, and what other things are they being exposed to as a result of operations at this facility and at the port in general. There's a lot to unpack there, and it took four hours to tell. But the major takeaways for the Air District are that we need to be better at keeping the community informed. We need to act quicker, and our actions need to be transparent and stronger to deter non-compliance at this facility. We also need to be better able to monitor this facility, and we need to bring partners to the table to keep this community informed in real time if there are releases that impact health from the facility itself. Thank you for your attention, and I'll now pause to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. So these will be questions from the City Council, and I'm going to kick it off. I've got a few questions of my own. The first is that is the reporting of emissions basically a self-regulating type of thing where Valero is supposed to report, but there is no real mechanical process where emissions are detected or reported to the Air District automatically?
It's a combination of both, Your Honor. So there are monitors on vents at the facility, both continuous emission monitors, parametric monitors, and facility monitors. Air District also has a series of there are required fence line monitors, and all of those report to us in real time. We have inspectors that are in that facility daily that are inspecting various elements of the process itself for leaks using our equipment. There's also ongoing source testing that's happening in real time. That means that we're in there looking at units with our team to determine what the emissions are. That's one component of it, and then there's also voluntary reporting that's required under the Title V permit that requires the facility to come forward and report non-compliance with Air District regulations.
And that was the case in the terms of the hydrogen vent. It was because you didn't know about it, it was not connected to the other automatic reporting.
That's correct. We've gone back and scoured all of the applications that we've received from this facility. This vent was never identified. As I said earlier, we thought it was a steam vent. And, you know, Valero were sampling at this particular vent as far back as 2003. They had a duty and a responsibility to come forward and tell us about those emissions and then minimize them.
Okay, and the regulation that limited emissions on these types of vents to 15 pounds a day, is that the same level that was in place in 2003?
Yes. That is one of our older regulations, and it has been in place since the late 1980s.
Okay, and you said that instead of 15 pounds a day, the actual releases were more like 4,200 pounds a day. And in terms of concentration, the allowable concentration was 300 parts per million, but the actual was over 19,000 parts per million. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And somewhere I read that you measured over a 3-year period between December 15th and December 15 and December 18. So that implies that you knew something in December 15 if you were measuring these releases that early. Or am I wrong about that?
Of which year, Your Honor?
December 15. Some of the reporting, and I don't know that it was in your report or whether it was some of the media reports, said that there was measurements done over a 3-year period between December 2015 and December 2018.
I'm not aware of that. We know that the facility had been taking samples for their process for their production as far back as 2003. The Air District did take some confirmatory samples in 2019 and has been taking took samples again more recently. So I don't know what that reference is, but the facility would have been taking samples in that time period.
But not the Air District was not taking samples.
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. But you did do a health risk analysis in 2019?
That's correct. When we issued the notice of violation, we followed up and looked at whether or not this facility would have been required to install controls based on the emissions we were seeing at that particular time. And we determined that it would have had to install controls based on the level of the releases and some of the toxic emissions that we were seeing.
And yet, knowing that, you still do not release that information to the city or the county or the community. And I think that's or at least one of my concerns, is that if you're identifying toxic releases and then not telling people about it, that obviously is problematic, I think, for the community.
We did inform the Solano County hazmat inspector at the site in around June of 2019, and we followed up with emails in 2020. So there was contact between us and the county. One of the things that I will say is that we take our duty to protecting this community very seriously. We should have done better in this regard, and we understand that, and that's why you see us changing our processes here.
Okay, and I've got one last question, and then I'll open it up to the rest of the council. So you mentioned the possibility of a fine.
Yes.
The fine is not set by the hearing board, but is recommended by staff. Is that right?
That's correct. Go ahead.
And you had mentioned the possibility that some portion, if there is a fine, that some portion of that fine could be shared with the city. Is that accurate?
It's our intention, Your Honor, to recommend to our board of directors that as much of the penalty money as possible under the state law will be returned to this community as we can make happen. So the commitment is if there are fines, we will try and return as much of it as possible to Benicia.
All right, good. Other questions for Mr. Breen? Vice Mayor Campbell.
Yeah, I me, I always like numbers. So anyways, it looks like your Air District separate statement, Valero Benicia Refinery, stipulated order of abatement, document 3731, page 4, table 2. I wanted to ask you a few things about that, because you were saying it's about 4,000 pounds a day. But when I look at these numbers, they're all over the board, as far as goes. So the first thing I want to know is, what is a total, looks like a 8,2 carbon, or maybe that's a B2 carbon, and then the other one is total POC. Because that's millions of pounds a year.
Yeah, so we converted that to tons, Vice Mayor. And there are two different types of pieces of information there. The POC is the organic material, and then there's a different way that we measure organics based on the requirements of the reporting in 8.2, and that's why you see a difference between those two numbers. One fraction is not counted under Regulation 8.2, but that 10,000 tons that you see under the POC, that's the total release. That includes benzene, toluene, and then the other compounds that I discussed earlier, like butane, pentane, all of those things.
Okay, well, let's take a year here, and in particular, 2017. Look down that column, and it says 3,664 pounds of POC during that year. And I did just a little math to see what that works out to compared with 15 pounds a day. Mm-hmm. And 5,000 pounds a day is 1.8 million. So that particular year, it was going 10,000 pounds a day of stuff coming out. And for me, you throw that number out, and it was 10,000 pounds. What's that mean? So, I decided to put it in a little bit different way. A medium-sized adult hippo weighs about 5,000 pounds. So we've got a hippo flying out every day, sometimes 2 hippos. And what I was wondering about was when I was listening on February 24th, there was this talk about, well, it almost sounded like it was just, some sort of fluff, excess, drifting out of that stack. Well, 5,000, 10,000 pounds a day is not just a little fluff drifting out there. And especially when you compare with 15 pounds a day, these numbers are, they're really almost comparable. So, what happened? I still can't see how this amount was missed, because you're talking about 2.5 to 5 tons a day. And, and it varies a lot. I will grant you the last year, in 2020, it was down to 193,000 pounds, which compared with 3 million, it is a sizable drop, but still, that, where did I have that? I actually, I had that worked out to how much that is per day, and it's still I think it's like 500 pounds a day, which is way, way over 15 pounds a day. So
that's pretty good, Vice Mayor.
Amounts is what I'm getting at, right? These are.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you see us taking this very seriously. That's why we're here tonight. That's why we're informing your community. This is not a small emissions release. It needs to be cleaned up, and we're moving expeditiously to take these folks to our hearing board. We, in terms of our process, we've changed quite significantly. We, in the past, would have settled these fines in private because it's the function of the staff to do that. But now we want to make sure that we are serving our community and being transparent. So we're providing the full detail of this to everybody in the community. We're inviting folks to come on March 15th to talk to our hearing board. They have the details of this. We've gone through a question and answer session with them. We hope that we've informed them. And we're hoping that by operating in this fashion, we can lend accountability and transparency to what's happening at this facility and facilities throughout the Bay Area.
Okay, the other question I had was one I saw on another table. It, listed the risk, carcinogens, and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Benzene, for example, is about 3.3 per million. And our Sonoma County Public Health Director seemed to say, well, that was not a big risk, but it depends. Now, I'm not asking you to be an epidemiologist, but what I am asking you is, about this risk, whether we should be worried or not, because you got 2 ways you can be in trouble with something like benzene. You get a high amount over a short period of time, like you work someplace where they use benzene as a solvent. The other is, a low amount over a long time. So, for example, I lived in Benicia now, I'm closing in on 40 years. And so this constant level in the air, even if it's at almost non-detectable levels, and we don't know for sure whether in the actual neighborhoods is that because we don't have the community monitors in the neighborhoods. And so, it seems like over enough years, you got, a significant risk, and it does cause benzene can, it is associated with multiple myeloma, leukemia, all of the cancers that are associated with blood forming. So why shouldn't we be worried about that?
Well, we at the Air District are significantly concerned about emissions from all of our refinery facilities. Even if the emissions levels are low, this is one point source at that particular facility. We, I think, take that seriously. If it's above a standard, it should never be above a standard. It should never be not reported. And, in terms of the cumulative impacts here, when we talked to Dr. Matthias, he did say that we couldn't rule out impacts from this. So we treat this as being serious. We believe that this needs to be cleaned up, and it needs to happen as quickly as we can make it through our hearing board process. No one on the Air District side is trying to minimize this. There are other risks in the community. On average, your health risk in the Benicia community from toxic air contaminants is somewhere between 300 to 500 chances of cancer in a million. That's just in general. But anything that you add to that can have a cumulative impact, and that's why we need to make sure that these emissions stop as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you.
All right, other questions? Councilmember Wyszynski.
Damien, I feel like we talk to each other every couple of days now, so I appreciate you taking the time and seeing you again. I'm going to ask you some questions I've asked you in the past just for the benefit of the audience. So please excuse me if they're a bit redundant for our discussion, but having tracked, BAAQMD's kind of press releases related to the refinery in town, there was a statement that was released on the 24th of January, and I'm going to read it just like I did the other evening, and hopefully that you can provide some context around it for the community. The Air District's initial notice of violation required Valero to come into compliance with its regulation at their Benicia facility as safely and expeditiously as possible. The facility immediately initiated a construction project to reduce the excess emissions, but this engineering fix did not solve the problem. So my question that I asked you once before, and I'll ask you again, is just, help maybe the community understand the process by which refinery and the district identified what they perceived to be a solution. That solution didn't work, and the spin to it this time is, and why the city wasn't notified when we figured out it wasn't going to work.
So relative to the engineering fix itself, we worked with Valero to look at kind of what the issue was, and at that time we believed that it was from the majority of the emissions were from just the general operation of that particular unit. The unit itself produces this hydrogen as a byproduct, and the proposal that Valero had did come in and receive a temporary Air District permit. Our hopes were that it would have solved the issue, and what the actual fix was the gas is recycled from that vent and put back into the front end of the process, and that did solve kind of the routine emissions from the unit itself. What it wasn't able to cope with is higher flows that were experienced during startup shutdowns and malfunctions. At the time we put the fix in place, we couldn't see that because of the general daily emissions, and that's why in the end the engineering fix didn't work. Relative to how we notify folks in the community and how we notify the city, this particular violation was reported to our board. That's done in open session. It's part of the notification that's provided, and that was provided back in 2019. Our board members are very diligent at questioning us about this, and they really are and do represent your community very well. In terms of this, we know that noticing wasn't perfect. We need to get better at that. We need to be, how one of your community members actually described it the other night was great. They said that, we're passive in terms of our notification. And we understand on our side that we need to be more active. We need to be better at bringing these things public. And, were we operating back in 2019 like we operate now, this would have arrived with the same level of information in front of our hearing board in a more expeditious fashion. That would have allowed for that public comment and allowed for the city to have input into the fix like you have now. And that's something that we own. But in the end of kind of our responsibility, there was also responsibility on the facility to have come forward and taken care of this years in the past. So, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I just have one more follow-up, Steve, so if you'll indulge me. So it did answer my question, thank you, Damon. And the next two-part question is actually related to hoping to try to explain to the community and the viewers out there the difference between acute and cumulative health risk, because I think the distinguishing difference, especially related to benzene, is that there's atmospheric benzene which exists in our daily lives, not trying to equate that to what the refinery puts out at all. However, I was wondering if you could try to draw a relative scale of reference to say like your normal filling gas station, right? And the acute worker exposure for somebody who works the gas station on a daily basis versus maybe the tons that were released out of this bin stack. So those two topics: one, acute and long-term cumulative related to health risk, and two, if there's any sort of comparison which you can draw between like your normal gas station and the benzene that was off gas released from the refinery.
So that's definitely a little bit outside of our comfort area as an air district. I explained earlier, I think, that our models are predictive and they show when our standards have been exceeded and that a facility needs to clean up. That's what our models are showing us here in Benicia. The facility, those emissions exceed our standards and this facility needs to clean up. As I'd explained earlier, you already have a level of exposure that you accept by living in a city or living in Benicia, and this is additive to it. So Dr. Matthias said that this couldn't be ruled out as a source of health concern in your community, and I would defer to him on that. But relative to the acute versus prolonged symptoms that you would see, in terms of acute exposure, what you're talking about is principally benzene that's driving the health exposure. And, problems associated with acute exposure are things like, skin irritation, nervous system problems, tiredness, dizziness, headache, possible asthma, eye or nose irritation. And then in terms of chronic exposure, you're talking more about what the Vice Mayor had spoken about. Impacts on the kidney, liver, and blood system, leukemia, cancers, those types of things. So while, in terms of where we are now, we've kind of modeled the worst case impacts, and they occur very, very rarely, and that's due to the prevailing meteorological conditions, which are essentially blowing the wind westerly across the facility and away from the community. But when those other conditions exist, you are reaching levels that are above our standards, and even though those levels may be low, this facility needs to cease those operations and come into compliance with our rules.
Thank you for the clarifying remarks.
Thank you. Councilmember Lawrence.
Thank you, Mayor. Welcome back to Benicia, Mr. Breen. But first of all, I want to thank you for your availability, not just to council staff, but more importantly, to the community. I think those 4 hours were definitely required, beneficial. And I want to let you know that I appreciate that. I also want to take a quick moment just to acknowledge and let you know I appreciate your humility in acknowledging the need to continue to work on the process. Certainly, I think this is a learning experience for everyone, a very serious one at that. And so thank you for that, as well. The third thank you is I appreciate your time and staff's time in responding to questions I had sent prior to these hearings, but the answers have been made public through your presentations. But for the edification of the community, basically kind of bundle up into 3 areas. The first was just an understanding about the district's obligation and process for informing and keeping communities apprised when stationary sources such as Valero violate standards. The second kind of category of questions was regarding, I think I was kind of qualifying it as a QA process for monitoring and recording these emissions. And then the last one, and this goes to, I guess, my sort of fresh questions, if you will, and that was from the district's perspective, what are Valero's obligations with respect to reporting and communication? Certainly, the clean air standards are crystal clear. The line is there. And so those are the 3 questions. And so the follow-up questions I have are, one, and I may have missed it in one of the slides, but what was the effect on the employees and the contractors at the facilities? Were you able to discern if that was any different than the community numbers that you were providing? I know you provided kind of Bay Area residents, and one thing I've been thinking about is what about the employees and those that had to work on site? I don't know if you have any data or insights to add to that.
I think we'd have to go back and look at our health risk assessments in depth. We do, as part of the work in doing those, calculated worker exposure, but I can't offhand give you those numbers. I would be happy to go back though and respond in writing. I'm going to take a step out on a limb here and say that because of the height of the stack and the velocity, I think it's unlikely that we would see major worker exposure as a result of it. And that is because it's at the top end of the refinery, winds are blowing directly west, and the stack is quite tall and the velocity is high. But I'm going to qualify that by going back and taking a look and sending you a written response on that, if that's okay.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you. We'll certainly share that with staff as well. And then I guess my primary question is, I agree with your premise that Valero, along with any, I think the district refers to them as stationary sources, have duties, obligations, certainly to report when facilities exceed what is expected of them by state and federal law. That said, during the presentation, you made a statement that I wrote down. That was, you said, Valero hid the emissions. Mm-hmm. So my question is, hid implies concealed. So are you suggesting that this was deliberate? If you could expand on what you meant by, or what you mean by they hid the emissions, I think that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have a situation here where we've got a facility who's taking samples of emissions from this vent to control their refinery processes. They're doing that from 2003 onwards. They knew or should have known that those emissions should have been reported. It's that simple. We went back and looked at the diagrams, the emissions applications for permits, and we found this emission source absolutely nowhere on any of that documentation. So in terms of this particular violation, the Air District is saying that Valero knew or should have known that these emissions should have been reported, and they knew or should have known that those emissions should have been minimized. Relative to our enforcement case, we are still talking with our partners and with our own legal team about penalties and about enforcement relative to that particular statement. There are standards in state and federal law around willful and negligent conduct. We're not at the point where we're going public with that particular. We are not saying that this facility is at that level, but we are not taking any investigatory or remedies off the table right now. So just to be clear, we're not saying willful or negligent, which has consequences under state law, but we are not taking that off the table just yet.
Thank you for your testimony and candor. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Strawbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Breen, for being here, along with your colleagues. When I was listening to the residents and your seminar, what you went over last couple weeks ago, one of the questions was, when did the city find this out? And I guess that's a really good question out there, because it sounds like the information was being held for one reason or another. And I know that there was great concern by our fire chief, who has built up a very good relationship with Valero. He was surprised. So when did the city actually find out about this situation?
So we informed the city in or around the time we went public with the release of the stipulated abatement order. So that would have been earlier in February or January of this year. So that was 2022. We know that, again, as I explained earlier, we had noticed our board, we had noticed them in a public forum about the ticket itself, but we were not proactive in coming out to folks and explaining what the significance of the emissions were, and that's something that we own as an organization. We've committed to being more proactive in that regard, and that's a commitment that I'm making again here to you tonight.
And in answer to your question, Ms. Strawbridge, we were briefed by Zoom by Air Board staff on January 24th of this year.
Right, and that was the earliest that
was the first time we heard, yeah.
That was the first time we heard. As far as the health risks, you've talked about our health officer in Solano County. How much more are we going to find out about the long-term effects of this? Just to say that we don't really know. So how do we get to the bottom of that? How do we find out what's going on from 2003 to present? That's almost 20 years of emissions. And how do we get to the bottom of those health risks, not only for our residents, but also the employees of Valero?
So health risk, as I explained earlier, is a little bit outside of the Air District swim lane. You have a very competent health officer there. He has looked at this data, and he is the best person to answer those questions for you. I think he intimated the other evening that historically it would be difficult to draw correlations between the emissions and community health. But I think the main takeaways from our presentation, from our health studies, is that health risk can't be ruled out as a result of this. We need to cure this. We need to cure this as quickly as possible. And then we need to make sure that things like this don't happen again. So the Air District is seeking additional penalty authority. We're seeking to beef up our staffing. We're seeking to put in a community monitor in Valero, in Benicia, so that we can better hopefully monitor when situations like this may occur. And then we need to provide a significant penalty to this facility to act as deterrence. So I wish I had a better answer to that, but that is, as I said, a little outside of our swim lane.
Okay, and then the regulations themselves, have they changed through the years as far as what is allowed and what's not allowed? or the
Yes.
level?
Yes, that is for definite. But the progressively air district regulations have gotten stricter. We are widely known as having one of the strictest regulatory regimes for refineries in the United States, if not the world. So while standards have changed, the particular standard that was violated here was put in place in 1987. So again, with the facility doing sampling, knowing that it had emissions, it would have, it should have, and had an obligation to come forward and let folks know about this, and then actually clean those emissions up.
Okay, and then my last question is, you said that you have given Valero to the next turnaround to complete this project. Do we know when that is?
So the language is a little bit more specific, Council Member. It says as soon as feasible. So there may be a situation between now and the next turnaround because the facility is integrated where it goes down and they can complete that fix early. We, on the Air District side, do know when that next turnaround is. Unfortunately, because of requirements in state law and requirements around how oil is actually traded in this country, that particular piece of information is marked as trade secret by the facility, and we can't disclose when that occurs because it could lead to speculation in the oil market, and there's a whole series of notifications and safeguards that are required between the facility and the federal and state government in order to make that to do those turnarounds, and that is a very closely guarded secret.
Okay, and I'm sorry, just to follow up to that, has Valero taken out any building permits for this as with you or with the city of Benicia?
We are still in the process of so what the hearing board action does is it requires them to clean up. It binds them to a date and it binds them to an emissions fix. They're still working on that emissions fix, but when they reach the point where they're ready to bring it forward, it will require air district permits at a minimum, and then depending on the solution, it may require CEQA and city permits. For example, were they to need to install a flare or install additional control equipment, that would, I think, more than likely require CEQA or a city permit, building permit.
Thank you.
All right, additional question, Vice Mayor Campbell.
And this is sort of a follow-up to Councilwoman Starbridge. I actually asked the question on the 24th. One of your, or the woman spokesman for the Air District said that the reason that we weren't told about this for about 3 years was it was somehow going to affect the integrity of the investigation. And so I asked the question, and I got sort of a bob and a weave. I didn't really get an answer on it. That how would revealing that you're investigating Valero for 16 years of past problems in 2019 have somehow changed the investigation versus keeping it secret to everybody? I mean, you're looking at, there was an emissions problem. You just go back and check the amount of tonnage that came out versus what was allowed, and you know whether you got a violation or not. Whether you reveal it to the public or not, it seems like it's the same process. So how is not, revealing it somehow affecting the integrity of the investigation?
So I think folks have some mistaken ideas about how our NOV process works. The NOV process is to put the violator on notice that something has happened in terms of them violating our regulation. It doesn't cease the investigation. So the investigation is still actually ongoing today, right? We're still looking at various elements of it. These are complex facilities. I wish it was as easy as being able to do a mass balance, material in, energy out, and we took significant and extraordinary steps to contact and involve some of our partners to look at our findings here, because when we saw them, to be quite honest, I think we were having some difficulty, making the correlation between the level and the size of these emissions and what we were seeing. So we did take some extraordinary steps, and in order to keep some of our methods and some of our sources of evidence contained within the investigation, we took extra time to do that. Now, between 2019 and now, doesn't cover all of that extraordinary work that we did. We should have brought this public sooner. There's nobody at our organization who doesn't understand that. We are changing our processes to do that. We're actively seeking to use our hearing board so that this does not happen again. These are our process changes that have been put in place since I moved into this position, since we've reorganized our legal department. And most of that work has actually happened over the last year. And that's why you see, you're not the only community who are going to be having one of these meetings, unfortunately, here coming up. But you see that change in us. I hope that we're being more transparent, but we do acknowledge that this did take too long.
Okay, because for me, I go out and jog all the time, and so I would have changed my, habits if I had known this was going on, and I would expect, a lot of the community would do the same thing. If you look at that table again, that table on page 4, you can see 2019 when you first were noticed of that, there was quite a bit of tonnage coming out at that time, and again. Getting back, and also this one goes back to Councilman Larga-Speda's comment. I don't think we'll ever know, what kind of effect something like benzene or toluene or ethyl benzene has on humans because of the movement of humans, whether you're talking about acute exposure or you're talking about people that work in the refinery and then they move on to other jobs and they just aren't tracked as far as, what health effects they have. And when you're talking about a cancer from an organic chemical, the incubation time could be in terms of decades. So, the people are gone. So you have no idea what the real numbers are. And so that's one of the problems with why I'm concerned that you didn't give us information when you first noticed it, because people were out there breathing the air, and that air may have had, some dangerous chemicals. Because humans, one thing is which has happened with humans, is we have not evolved enough to catch all the dangerous things which have happened. Technology moves on ahead of us. Like you put your hand in a fire, you pull it back. We've had eons to develop that. We do not have the ability to sense when we're in an air environment where, for example, there are dangerous chemicals like benzene, toluene, styrene, what have you. We just haven't evolved those senses yet. So the only thing we can do is when you notice something is coming out of the refinery is to let us know about it. We can at least try and make our own decisions. Thank you.
All right, so I think we're about ready to move to public comment. But before we do, I have one last question for you, Mr. Breen. You had mentioned that you had informed the board in 2019 about this. And did you ask the board to keep this confidential?
No. So our process is for every notice of violation that we issue, Mayor Young, we actually publish a report that goes to the board of directors that lists the notice of violation, when it was issued, and what it was issued for.
Okay. I was going to point out that Solano has two seats on the 24-member board.
That's correct.
So there were 2 members from Solano County who got this information back in 2019. They also did not pass that information on to us.
Well, I don't want you all to be too critical of your members on there. As I said before, they do a great job for you. That they down through the years, Jim Sperring has been your representative on there, and I think our executive officer is on here tonight, and I can tell you that I have been grilled on many times by Mr. Sperring, Director Hannigan, and Director Wilson about goings on in your county and in your city. Now, what this boils down to is our approach. We've been too passive in bringing this information forward. We haven't emphasized the seriousness of some of these violations. We didn't act in time here to bring all of this into the public forum. And that's something we own as an organization. And we're hoping that you all will hold us accountable going forward so that this doesn't happen again. But there is one other thing that I did want to mention that your community brought up to us, which is unlike in Contra Costa County, where they get warnings and information about releases in real time, that doesn't appear to be happening, at least in your county. And whether it is or it isn't, that's an area where the Air District needs to work with the city and with the county so that we can get better at letting folks know when these events are happening and what they might be being exposed to, so that they can make those choices that the Vice Mayor had mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And for those who want to continue their involvement in this issue, the next thing is happening is the hearing board on the 15th. So
That's
is there an easy way for people to understand how to either participate, to listen, to dial in? Is it possible to put some kind of something on the screen in terms of sign up, or how people are able to access this hearing?
Yeah, we have information on our hearing board that's posted to our website, to the BAAQMD.gov website. You can go in there, look at upcoming events, and you can see where the hearing board is happening. The hearing board has the documents listed that we talked about, the stipulated order and the statement. And then we also have information on health risk assessments, the hearing board process, and news releases, the health risk assessments themselves on a separate news page. And I'll be happy to provide the council with links to all of that after the meeting's over.
Thank you very much, Mr. Breen, Mr. Broadbent, Ms. Evie, all the Air District staff for continuing to work with us. And I think there's obviously some room for improvement, and we look forward to doing that. The hearing board starts at 9:30 a.m. on the 15th. So if you're interested in tuning in or participating in that, that's the way to do it. We'll now move to public comment. And contrary to what I said earlier, the first public comment will actually come from Valero. So we're going to introduce Josh Tulino, who is the general manager of Valero, who I believe has a statement or something that I can say. Mr. Tulino, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Young and the council. As he mentioned, my name is Josh Tulino, and I'm the Vice President and General Manager of the Valero Benicia refinery. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide a few comments with regard to the agreement and the hydrogen vent issue that the Air District just spoke about. Following a self-reported Title V deviation from another Bay Area refinery in 2018, as was previously mentioned, Valero was asked to review our hydrogen plant operation. And at that time, we discovered that a vent within that unit contained trace hydrocarbons that exceeded the Air District's Regulation 8-2. And as the Air District mentioned, we did have sampling on that stream that had gone back to the year 2003, but it wasn't that we were aware that applicability of the regulation applied to that vent. So once we identified in 2018 that issue was the case, we promptly reported this to the Air District, and we undertook immediate actions to substantially reduce those emissions. Between 2019 and 2021, we implemented piping modifications that the Air District described, and that initially was successful in reducing about 71% of the total amount of the emissions. We continued and further implemented engineering controls that were successful in reducing emissions by a total of 98% from the levels that were measured in 2018. And the reason we took those steps was because those fixes, those corrections could be completed while the units were still in operation. It did not require a turnaround in order to complete those. So we implemented them as soon as we possibly could. While this was a good first step, we recognized we weren't stopping there. and we worked collaboratively with the Air District to determine how to resolve the remaining 2% of the emissions. So this included multiple site visits by the district, as well as numerous sampling and data requests over the previous 3 years. At the end of this process, Valero and the district concluded jointly that an additional capital project would be necessary. And that project is the subject of the stipulated agreement that has been signed by both Valero and the Air District and will be reviewed at the hearing board on March 15th. With respect to the city of Benicia, I also want to mention that Valero takes its obligations under our cooperation agreement, which was in place since 2019. We take those obligations seriously, and we remain committed to providing notification to the city when there's an immediate or threatened release that could impact the public. This source of emissions did not fall into that category at any time. I want to stress to each of you on the council and to every member of the public that Valero takes our environmental compliance very seriously. While this was an unfortunate discovery, we recognize, as does the Air District, that we could do better as well. We are happy to have made great progress in substantially reducing the hydrogen vent emissions, and will continue to work with the Air District to fully resolve this matter. So thank you, Mayor Young, for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Will you take some questions from the council?
Yes, sure.
So you said that you were sampling the emissions from the vent pipe as far back as 2003, but you did not know that it was necessary to report those to the Air District?
So the sampling that was done at that time was for process optimization reasons, not for environmental compliance. And as I mentioned, that vent was in place since the beginnings of the refinery when it was constructed. The refinery was acquired by Valero from Exxon in the year 2000. And at that time, there was no information provided that would indicate that this vent was subject to that regulation 8-2. It takes a triggering event for us to go look at whether or not we need an emission source to apply to the rule. And that triggering event was the sampling or the request by the Air District in 2018. So upon sampling, when we were looking at that stream specifically for environmental compliance, we identified that it in fact did exceed the regulation, and we took immediate action from there.
And what accounts for the difference between the Air District saying you fixed 71% of the problem, and you just said further fixes brought it to 98%? Is that because the missing 2% is stuff you can't control when you do a turnaround?
The 71% that the Air District refers to was from the first fix that we installed, which was the piping modification. That was the project they described that needed the air permit from the district. So that fix was completed in 2019. And at that time, we were able to reduce the 71%. We have since then made other modifications, and those did not require the installation of any new facilities. Those had to do with the way we operated the units and within our control systems. So those additional measures have taken our emissions reduction down to 98% as of this year.
And my last question has to do with a statement. I think you said that you identified trace chemicals in these emissions, but what we heard earlier is that the releases were hundreds of times over the allowable limit. And so that seems like a lot more than trace chemicals to me. What am I missing here?
Yeah, the concentrations in those streams were still very low. And that's why I described them as trace. The volumes add up to a large amount, and that's what Vice Mayor Campbell was referencing in terms of the number of pounds. But the concentrations were still low. They were never measured on any of our fence line monitors, and as I mentioned, never resulted in any immediate threat to public health. So that's why we described them as trace.
The report from the Air District said the concentration levels allowable was 300 parts per million, but the actual measurements were 19,000 parts per million. That's a significant difference between 300 parts and 19,000 parts per million. But
yeah, and we've recognized since that we were in exceedance. I don't dispute that.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Tulino? Councilmember Largaspada.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome, Mr. Tulino. It's kind of a comment with a question baked into it, but again, I'm very satisfied and pleased that the district is holding Valero, accountable, and I appreciate Valero's cooperation. But frankly, I am disappointed with the refinery, as well. At the same time, for years, the city and Valero have worked together, and a lot has been accomplished, and we will continue to do good things together. I look forward to that. I think we all do. But kind of just goes to, again, the primary question is a similar question that I asked of the district. I think most of the council members did it as well. And that was the question of why. And this is really what the disappointment stems from, and that is, why wouldn't you disclose the investigation, regardless of where it was at? Give us, or the chief, the city manager, an explanation, and put the data, into plain English. Not to oversimplify the complexity of the facility, as well as the chemistry of these emissions. I'm disappointed because Valero could have and should have been, the company that gets ahead of trouble. We appreciate all the positive things you've done, the health record, the safety record, but I believe, as I said earlier, that you do have a duty to keep the community apprised when emissions at your facility exceed state and federal clean air standards, even if there is no imminent threat. I don't know what the precise solution is. Therefore, I encourage you to work with the city manager and the chief to expand the hazard materials incident notification process, because that policy, in my opinion, is a great example of the cooperation between Valero and Benicia. So I hope you will take that suggestion to heart, and in addition to working with the district, seek ways where you can expand the notification process with the staff and the community. So thank you again for making yourself available this evening.
Okay, thank you, council member. I certainly will take your advice, and we will follow up with the city manager. I stated, in the comments earlier, we are committed to the cooperation agreement we have with the city, and we fulfill it, at every opportunity. So certainly we'll take the opportunity for us to get better and work with the city manager. So thank you for that.
All right, other questions for Mr. Tulino? Councilmember Masinski.
Well, I guess I would say, Josh, thanks so much for just coming in front of the council and the community and being willing to address a challenge, because I think everybody who's at the table with the conversation is acknowledging that it's less than ideal. But what I'd like to request is that obviously we're at a point to where we've had a triggering event that required some action. And I guess previously this wasn't underneath your leadership and management, but you're dealing with it now, and I can acknowledge that. But I'd like to make sure that it doesn't happen in the future, right? And I want to make sure that we can collectively all do the best we can to make sure that we can avoid a similar type of circumstance in the future. And so in my mind, this is the triggering event to make sure that whatever vent or pipe or, valve is at the refinery that should be reported will be reported. And I don't know if that's an internal, root cause analysis to determine how you guys got to this point, but I think that there does need to be some follow-up action, and I'd appreciate if you could share the results of whatever that kind of root cause analysis is with the council, so that we can make sure that we understand, moving forward, how we can all effectively do better and communicate better.
Okay, thank you, council member. I appreciate your comments, and we will take that into consideration.
All right. Seeing no other hands, I'm going to open it up now to public comment from the public. And this will be an opportunity for the public to make comments to the city council. Reminder, this is a presentation. The city isn't going to be taking any action about this issue. The action will happen at the hearing board. but this is an opportunity to let the council hear your comments. So, Mr. Moderator, do we have people waiting to speak?
Yes, we do, Mayor.
Please admit the first person.
All right, good evening, Andres Soto. You are with the Benicia City Council. Go ahead and state your comment.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I'd like to start out by thanking the community, the members of the community of the entire Bay Area who've been putting pressure on for years on the Air District to be more transparent, to hold industry more accountable. That's why we're here today, is that there have been changes in the Air District, in the administration of the Air District. There was a notorious scandal of a whistleblower case that dealt with refinery violations directly, and the historic pattern of the Air District of burying these violations on the consent calendar and done administratively by the administrator. Anything under $10,000 did not have to really be reported to the board other than this consent item. So that's the history here. And when we look at the history of Valero here, 15,000 pounds versus 4,000 pounds daily, that's over 20 million pounds over that time. And we're talking about serious carcinogenic chemicals. And Mr. Tulino had the nerve to say they were no threat. I beg to differ with him. And, you know, Valero knew this. They had the affirmative responsibility report. That's what Damian Breen is trying to say. They have affirmative responsibility report, and they evaded that at best and deliberately misled us at worst. During the crude by rail, they were saying, oh, we're the safest refinery in the Bay Area. We're the best. They were lying then. They're lying now. And so we need to understand that, you know, Valero is continuing to pollute our community as we speak, and they pollute our politics as well as the air. And don't let Valero turn Benicia into another Richmond, where they throw their weight around to dominate policy and politics. Benicia, you can do something. You should adopt a resolution demanding investigations and charges be brought by the Solano County District Attorney, the California Attorney General, and the federal EPA, because they have violated all these laws. Benicia should demand maximum penalties be assessed so that this actually acts as a deterrent, not just for Valero and their misdeeds, but the ongoing misdeeds of the other refineries in this area. And Benicia needs to start developing a conversation about what are the plans for the future. These refineries are not going to be here. We're going to have to decommission these refineries to stop the climate crisis. And if Benicia doesn't get ready for it, you're going to get caught in the shorts. One of the things the Air District needs to do is, and we're hearing the results of this now, is there's one person who's a health officer with no staff. There needs to be a robust public health unit within the Air District that's working with local health departments. You know, Dr. Matias, I'm not going to count him as an expert on respiratory diseases from industry. I think we need to have other people looking at it. And in particular, the impact model shows the most vulnerable neighborhoods in Benicia. And I have a question. Is the city going to notify the residents in those areas indicated on the map that they are being disproportionately exposed to these dangerous cancer-causing emissions from Valero, or are you just going to use these city council meetings as the public's responsibility to inform themselves? And, you know, there needs to be more than one monitor. There needs to be multiple monitors because of Benicia's geography. There's microclimates, and Benicia needs to finally start protecting itself by adopting an ISO, an industrial safety ordinance. It's not a panacea, but it will bring more transparency to more industries just beyond that of Valero. And so thank you for your time. And, you know, the hearing board will only vote on this stipulated agreement. The hearing board is not assessing the fine. That will be done by the staff, and you need to take a position demanding strong deterrence with heavy fines on these repeat criminal violators.
All right, thank you, Mr. Soto. Please admit the next caller.
Good evening, Constance. You are with the Benicia City Council. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members. I'm Constance Butel at 1501 Shannon Court for the past 32 years. I'm a founding member of the Air Watch Bay Area and a member of the Good Neighbor Steering Committee. And I have to say, as parenthetical, I agree with Andre Soto's suggestion about pursuing, as a council, further action against this criminal event. First of all, though, I want to thank you for bringing this topic before the residents of Benicia. I think it's really important. I'm glad the Air District took steps to do that. And I must say that I'm totally enchanted with Mr. Breen's Irish accent, that he has to listen to our flat American accents. But I hope you have a long tenure with the Air District, and I do compliment the Air District on its full presence last Thursday in really listening to our community and to the issues we had. I do hope that somebody from the Air District will stay tuned, as we have a consent item about the Air District monitor coming up, which I have asked to be pulled in case there are any questions. By the way, just to preface that, I'm thrilled that we're getting that air monitor. We've been waiting years for that. We are in an area of 5 major refineries. We are just one, and so we can't just say we're affected by Valero's emissions, that there are emissions coming when we receive the majority westerly breezes coming in our direction, and we also have the pleasure or danger of receiving emissions from Marathon and whatever Shell has become at this point in time. I would advise one of your council members that we are not an audience, but we are constituents and residents of Benicia. And so we are listening very carefully to these presentations and to these issues on our health and safety, which is, of course, your official duties as elected officials for us. And I must say, this is the time of the terrible situation with Russia and Ukraine. I served in the Air Force in active duty for 5 years and 3 years in the Air Force Reserves. And my first assignment was at Hamilton Air Force Base in Marin County near Novato. We did operational readiness inspections, etc. It was the height of the Cold War. It was last century in the late 60s that I was there. And I need to let you know that the refineries are targets for international targeting. And in our operational readiness inspections, where we simulated a Cold War attack, our area with all the refineries were blown to bits, along with Travis Air Force Base, etc. So these are things that we need to keep in mind as we deal with refineries and issues facing our health and safety. Thank you.
All right, please admit the next caller. Thank you, Ms. Butel.
All right, good evening, Marilyn Bardet. You are with the Benicia City Council.
Thank you. Good evening, Council and Mayor. And I want to thank the Air District, Mr. Breen, for your excellent workshop last week and for your participation here tonight and your interest in public comment. I, as a member of the Good Neighbor Steering Committee for many years, I am deeply interested in what has gone on and transpired, as I reported to you last week. I'm also very appreciative that our council was in attendance last week. That helps us all feel that we're pretty much on the same page. I want to invoke the precautionary principle. Usually the precautionary principle refers to scientific information that may be in doubt, hasn't been proven, but when you face scientific doubt, you give the benefit of the community of that doubt and do the best you can to protect citizens' health and safety. Well, in this case, I find it very interesting that Josh Tulino has said, and I'm a member of the Valero CAP, so I have tried very hard to understand this issue as the refinery reported it at the last CAP meeting. And tonight he just repeated that they didn't know I may have written this incorrectly, so correct me if I'm wrong, didn't know the applicability of Reg 8-2 to that hydrogen vent, and that another refinery had called that, or it referred to as a Title V deviation. That's very interesting, because Title V permitting processes is an opportunity for every refinery to report to the district about every instrument in the refinery, every piece of equipment, its functioning, the kinds of emissions, and whether they're exceedances, et cetera. In other words, it's like a performance test, and it's pages and pages and pages long of technical information. What I can't understand is how that hydrogen vent seemed to have escaped Title V reviews for permitting of the facility so that the facility can continue to operate. In other words, one simple, not so simple, problem with a hydrogen vent that was in operation every day needed to help control the pressurization inside the pipelines that control hydrogen flow throughout the refinery. What I can't understand is how that, for some bureaucratic reason, that the district didn't pick up on, apparently, that vent was not reviewed under a Title V review. So I'm very interested in how the district will in the future review such things, because I don't think that a bureaucratic excuse that you don't know whether a vent should be reported on under Title V can be an excuse. And I believe Valero has, people have used the word concealment and about hidden information. I believe that Valero has violated the city's MOA, the agreement to improve communications between the refinery and the city. I believe that accountability is an issue the city can have its own charge against Valero for that violation, because it was a kind of an agreement with the city council that we would not have to go to an ISO, to invoke an ISO to establish an industrial safety ordinance. And in deference to Valero's cooperation to get fence line monitoring systems in place by 2019, we wouldn't have to go to an ISO. We could just simply rely on the MOA. But now we see that MOA, by virtue of this abatement order, we have been seriously misled. And it could have been, I agree with what council has said so far, that, there's no reason Valero couldn't have, in that spirit of cooperation with the city, announced that there has been a problem identified with the district in 2019. It's now 2023. And we have questions about the functioning of those fence line monitoring systems, and that we still lack a hydrogen sulfide monitoring system out at Valero perimeter. That's very important to realize. We got a lot to take care of, and I hope the district will be helping us ensure that Reg 15 is, Reg 12, Rule 15 is implemented properly. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ms. Bourdain. Please admit the next caller.
All right, Ryan, you are with the Benicia City Council. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, City Council members. I appreciate you bringing this to the public. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the meeting last week, so I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and hear the information presented. My concern, I echo everybody else who's already spoken. One concern I have is with the air quality district that they held this information for a period of 3 years, and I've lost trust. I realize now that they're coming forth with this information. I would request that we have an independent third party test the air quality because I've lost faith. In regards to Valero, it certainly seems like information was concealed and withheld, and they weren't forthright with information. They should have dug into that further to find out if those emissions were in compliance or not. I take that on them to take the onus to do that. They didn't do that. So yeah, absolutely, they should be held accountable for, I feel like, malice and negligence are here. And yes, I think, fines should be levied against them, absolutely. And certainly communication should be there. I mean, they've been a strong partner of Benicia's for a long time, and I feel like they violated that trust, and there needs to be consequences for that. So that's what I'd like to see at a minimum. I certainly want to attend the hearing coming up and get more information. I do appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Corsi. Please admit the next caller.
Good evening, Stephen. You were with the Benicia City Council. Go ahead with your comments.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much. I guess I'll start by thanking the folks from the district for appearing and answering questions just as they did on February 24th. That's appreciated. I also want to second, what the previous speakers have said, the various points they've made without repeating those points. In terms of going forward, in terms of dealing with Valero, it seems clear that the most charitable explanation of or interpretation of how Valero handled this matter for 16 years is one that involves incredible incompetence and incredible indifference to the well-being of the community it claims to be a partner of and a trusted member of. That's the most charitable interpretation. You go beyond that, and I don't think it's necessarily too strong a word to say that since it may well have known what it was releasing into the atmosphere and that it was in violation of relevant regulations, that we've had a cover-up going on. I know that may sound like hyperbole, that's strong language, but I'm not sure it's inappropriate language at all. So in view of that, what can the city do? What can the city council do? I think there are a number of steps. One is to just simply start, considering and then approving an industrial safety ordinance along the lines of what I understand, and I'm new to the area of what Contra Costa has. I think the trust that's been violated is such that it's absolutely mandatory at this point. And again, it's not as though this is in isolation what Valero has done now. There have been previous violations, previous events, previous activities on its part that make what's going on now part of a pattern. This may be the most egregious example, I'm not sure, but it may be the most egregious example, but that really does weigh in favor of a stronger agreement between the city, and Valero, or I shouldn't say agreement, monitoring, oversight, such as the industrial safety ordinance, ordinance. I think the city should also call for, this would simply be a resolution, I suppose, but let's call for and have a formal notification or request of investigation regarding criminal liability, be it by the California Attorney General, whether federal standards and regulations have been violated, an investigation by the EPA and other relevant government bodies, whatever might fall within their respective purviews. I think the city can also call for an investigation or consultation, at least, and arrange a consultation with any number of the various academic or non-governmental or independent or expert bodies that exist in the Bay Area, or perhaps beyond it, to ascertain the potential public health impacts here. Dr. Matthias is not an expert on this matter per se, and I don't know whether we should simply rely on his assessment, as well-intentioned as it may or may not be. I think there are greater sources of expertise to bring into account here to consider what happens going forward. And as for the district itself, it's vowed greater accountability, greater transparency. Well, one way of demonstrating that is both at tonight's meeting, via the very good questions that Mayor Young, Councilmember Larga-Spada, Vice Mayor Campbell, and the other council members have asked. You've got some good questions, and you have a whole slew of very good questions posed at the February 24th forum. Take those, boil them down to 10, 15, 20 questions in terms of a question and answer fact sheet, so that people can have a better sense of issues such as the matter that Mayor Young and Councilmember Larga-Spada posed about what did Valero know, and pardon the expression, when did it know it? To try to answer that to the best of your ability. To try to answer to the best of your ability this matter of the 3-year delay. There are other matters that haven't come up yet that came up on February 24th, such as whether and in what ways a statute of limitations might apply. One thing I finally want to emphasize is that there's just understandably a big focus on this, this meeting, on March 15th. That meeting to review this situation will not be the whole matter by any means. It doesn't get its fines, and that's another thing that needs to be addressed by the district in terms of public information. What's the process for assessing fines? What's the process for public input into that, so that we're not taken by surprise and can weigh in? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Mr. Donald. Please admit the next caller.
There are no more public comment, Mayor.
Okay, and Ms. Wolf, will we receive any written comments on this?
No, not after the meeting started, Mayor Young.
All right, in that case, I want to thank the Air District staff, Mr. Breen and Mr. Broadbent Nasidi. I want to thank Tulino. Any last comments you want to make, Mr. Breen, before we wrap this up?
Mr. Mayor Young, can I speak real quick?
Oh, sure, Chief Chadwick.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment. I've been incredibly frustrated by the way that this has been handled. The way that it was brought to us, the delays from the Air District, and now how they've been handling it. I've kept quiet for the most part, at least publicly, but when Mr. Breen makes some false statements about our notification policy, I felt like I had to at least jump in. Mr. Breen, you made a comment that we don't have a quality notification system like they do in surrounding counties, and I think that possibly you just aren't aware of what we have. But back in 2019, we recognized that. We modeled our policy directly off of the Contra Costa policy. It's been working better, in my opinion, than the surrounding counties, to the point where Contra Costa just recently modified theirs to model after ours. So they just adjusted their policy to match our policy. So I think it's very unfortunate to make a statement such as that. I just want that clarified.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Breen, did you want to close us out with any comments?
Yeah, I think we've definitely heard a lot from this community. We've heard a lot about openness, transparency, the need for better communication on these types of things when they occur. And we're weighing how we can better interact with Solano County's representatives on our board to deal with some of the openness, transparency, and question answering that folks have asked us for. I do think the idea of a fact sheet is a good one, and that's something that we'll look into over the next couple of days. And to the chief's point, all I was trying to do was relay what I heard in the public meetings from the people of Benicia. It's their impression that they're not getting information in real time. And that's one of the main takeaways that I did mention as part of what I said today. If that is the case, we need to work better with the city and work better with the county so that we can give folks better information in real time so that they have choices to make relative to their health. So I appreciate, obviously, the community coming online with us again tonight to give us more of that input. And we'll definitely be taking information that we got here back to both your representatives on the Air District and our board chair with the very serious admonishment from the council here that we need to do better in terms of providing you information and keeping you in the loop with what we're finding at this facility.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks to Mr. Tulino and to the public for your input. And this is likely not the last we will be discussing related issues.
Mayor, if I may, there's a couple of hands that were raised right when we, right after we called for them public comments.
Oh, okay.
We'd like to call people who haven't been called on before.
Sure.
That's at your discretion.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Moderator, do we have a couple of people ready to speak on this topic?
Yes, we do, Mayor.
Please admit them.
All right, go ahead, Kathy. You are with the Benicia City Council.
Hi, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to speak now or if there's going to be another public comment period after this.
On this topic?
Well, it's on air monitoring, but it's not specifically on this topic.
Okay, well, we are going to, we're going to have public comment if you're going to talk about the B camp thing. We'll
Yes.
have public comment happening in just a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and do we have additional speakers, Mr. Moderator?
No, there are not.
Okay.
Mayor Young, there was one, but the person had already spoken,
Oh, okay.
and so he already had a chance.
Right, okay.
Oh, we have one more, Mayor. They did.
Okay.
Go ahead, caller. You're with the Benicia City Council.
Good evening, all. Mayor, council members. My name is Justin Tashik. I'm a resident over on Kellen Court, which is very close in proximity to the refinery, kind of living on the front lines, and I do appreciate everybody here today sharing information. I wasn't able to attend the 24th meeting on the hearing, but I did have the opportunity tonight to hear what was presented, and I think full transparency, and I request that moving forward, we do keep the community informed. I do have residents that have limited knowledge or access to information, and they seem to get it second, third hand. I would like to remind all of us of the December 11th incident, and that was a release of feedstock, heavy oil that was dispersed amongst the community. I have heard reports of 200, 300 homes being impacted. The cleanup is still taking place. There are residents that are still learning of this release back in December, and some properties are in process of still being cleaned up. Information then was lacking, and still I have some community members that have heard they should have thrown their garden, their vegetables or fruit away, which they weren't informed then, had ingested that during that period to today, and further the bees. So the honey that's been made, is that impacted? There's a lot of questions related to that. I moved into the community back in 2009, certainly value Valero's partnership then and the trust, but these two incidents, December 11th and now this coming forward, trust is certainly something of question. And moving forward, I would like transparency, but also to rebuild the trust and to have the information so that we, as parents that have young kids, can make decisions on what we do and where we live. I have some friends that were interested in moving into Benicia, but have elected not to move to Benicia because of these incidences as of recent. So they are moving to other communities, and I do fear, that Benicia is getting a black eye in its community. We are one of the best communities still, I believe, in the Bay Area, and I'm proud to be living here in Benicia and raising my children, but I want to do so in a healthy manner, and I don't want to jeopardize their health, by living in close proximity to the refinery. So I do thank everybody for the presentation tonight and the attention on this, as it is very important, and I think we could all do better moving forward. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Moderator, does that complete the?
We have one more, Mayor.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Roger. You are with the Benicia City Council.
For taking me for a few comments. I've been listening intently at what has been discussed and presented. And one thing I want to share with you, I would hope that the City Council working with the Air Board and Valero, get a little more technical background and knowledge on both what went on and what is going on. Frankly, a lot that I heard said lacks basic understanding that I think is needed for people to properly address. I know there's a lot of fear factor going on. They think, oh, the refinery missed something and it's going to cause major problems. Got to keep that in perspective. For one thing, just to share with the council, when I'm by the way, a chemical engineer with advanced graduate degree in chemical engineering as well, and not working at Valero ever or Exxon, but I worked in other refineries in the past for almost 40 years. And back in the 60s, events like they were described were immediately approved because it wasn't an issue for that time of year. I mean, we didn't even have people worried about asbestos back then. And so a lot of things have changed over the years. And I know Valero's trying to change. And I know Valero was caught flat-footed. Maybe they could have been a little more proactive in catching that. But when you pick up something from another company, you would assume that they're already compliant. Maybe the rules have changed before they picked it up. I know for one that back in '66, that event was something that was approved in the operating. Other refineries did have that event captured, but that was something that was up to the airport on approval. But bottom line message to the council is, I think you do well getting some more technical expertise background, properly evaluate what's going on. I think that's very, very important. Because there's a lot of people saying things that just don't make sense from a technical standpoint. Say that for a fact. Not only my background as a chemical engineer, but also a board certified professional engineer in the field. And Valero took care of 98% of what's going on, and the remainder during the height of the event and the dispersion modeling. Very few people, if any, will ever get exposed to the city. I can tell you that for a fact. In fact, when we got to spare the air day with winter fire, the pollution factor for those are many times the exposure that you might have from that particular event. So I look forward to having the city council work with Valero and take care of the remaining 2%. But just want to let you know that it's not to the degree that people are talking about. One final word for you all. I listened to the presentation with the Air Board. It's been about a week ago. And there's also a significant lack of knowledge of what tent line monitors and other analyzers do in detecting emissions from sources. And probably would do people well to get a little bit of background and know the technology and the methods involved in the analysis. Because people were saying things like, oh, let's see, this tent line monitor was broken. I doubt it. But I would basically say with an IRO attached monitor, mostly being used now, is that emissions can go over, they can go under, and even if they go through it, it's a distance averaging analysis. You can have a high 2 feet, and when you're having to over a long distance, you can have undetectable sources. So again, I just caution people to keep that all in perspective. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Moderator, does that complete the number of people waiting?
Yes, that completes public comment, Mayor.
All right. Well, with that, I want to again thank the Air District Board and Valero on the public comments that we received tonight. I'm going to take a 5-minute break and then we'll move on with the rest of the agenda. Thank you. Okay, and then our last consent item is 14J, and that was the approval of agreement with BAAQMD for an air quality monitoring station. I believe that was pulled by Constance Butel. Are you still with us, Ms. Butel?
Yes, go ahead, Ms. Butel, you're with the City Council.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Young. First, I'm going to urge you to vote yes on this item. Damian Breen had indicated earlier that many people were asking questions about when would Benicia get an air monitor. And so many of us were very surprised to see this merely as a consent item, especially those of us who have been working for tens of years in order to advocate with the Air District to get a monitor in Benicia. So I'm thrilled it's coming and that it's here, but I'm very surprised to see it as a mere consent item and not a bigger deal within our community, which it really is. Now, there is a very interesting attachment to tonight's item, and it's the Air District site analysis, which contains very detailed information about Benicia and wind rosettes, etc. But figure B10 particularly shows those areas within our city that are most vulnerable to high concentrations of emission pollution. And so my question is about the placement of the fire district. I know there's electrical and security and other kinds of issues, and I do hope that you will vote to approve this item, but I'm just very concerned or very interested in knowing why the fire museum was the site that was finally determined. Thank you.
All right, I think that's a fair question. I had the same question myself. I think the best person to address that is either Mr. Giuliano or our Fire Chief Chad probably has had the most contact with the Air District on this question. You want to speak to this, Chief?
Yeah, I can try to address it really quickly. I mean, I'm not the expert in doing the analysis. That's definitely the Bay Area Air Quality District that took that deep dive. I did work with them, if you remember. Shortly after they had a couple of public meetings where they were working with or meetings where they were working with the school district, those talks sort of fell through, and at that point we searched for another site for this monitor. I was able to provide them with, I believe, 29 sites in the city that the city owned that could be feasible, and they took those sites. They actually did site visits. They had feet on the, boots on the ground at each one of those sites over multiple days. And there's a lot that goes into it in addition to just the analysis, like Ms. Bardet mentioned, access, security, access to power, the elevation, topography, all of those were taken into account, and they did do a very detailed analysis of all of that. They narrowed it down to 3 sites. We then had a public meeting, workshop with the district where the community got to interact with them and talk about those sites. I believe they did some polling, just online impromptu polling of the community members that were there, and it carried over afterwards, and that site was chosen as the best site. What I will say is that one of the experts is on the meeting, Eula Perkins from the Air District, and she could probably do an even better job of really talking about some of the concerns that you or Ms. Bardet might have.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Perkins, do you want to address this question, why this particular site was selected?
Sure. First, I just wanted to say thank you to the Benicia community members for the continuous feedback that you provided throughout this process and voicing your concerns. Also to you, Mayor Young, and the City Council for placing this on the agenda, and Josh Chadwick, Mario Giuliani, and Eric Hobson for their support to help identify these candidate sites. And to you, Constance, just to answer your question, we did take several considerations in identifying this location. As Chief Chadwick mentioned, we, initially had isolated a place that was just south of the refinery, but those talks did fall through. But as far as the site selection process, and this has been discussed in previous meetings as well, if you'd like to revisit some of those, but I can just briefly go through what those steps were. So we're also looking at the distance from the sources of the air pollution from the refinery, but also other facilities that are surrounding the area of concern, which is an we were able to determine was the southwest portion of Benicia. Also looking at some typical and episodic events that may occur and the historical cases of those. But more important, I think what this process really tied into was getting input from the community and other environmental justice metrics. And so that component that Josh spoke to as far as like having the community meeting, there was one held in 2018. And then we did have a subsequent one in 2021 when we were unable to secure the site near at Robert Semple Elementary. Some other things that Josh mentioned happened to be the location and just having access to power. So even the 29 sites that we did go to, some of them had some logistical issues as far as like accessing power or providing safe access to the station, you know, both for the community and for the station operators who would be responsible for maintaining the site. And that too is something that we take very seriously. We want to make sure that we can keep this station up and running at all times, and that it's going to be safe for both community members and for the people who are going to be maintaining that. Another issue that another component that we measured was basically just how long would we be able to be set up in a location like this. So just having long-term availability for the station is very important because of all of the energy and resources that go into actually just implementing this. As you can see, this has been an ongoing process for both the Air District, the citizens, and for the city as well. So with all those components mixed together on top of the discussion, the very useful and productive conversation that we had with community back in 2021, that was in June, based on those 3 sites that the fire museum basically was identified as the best location of the 3 out of the 29. So I'm hopeful that I answered your question, but if I did not, please, if you have anything else that you'd like to ask.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on one thing that Ms. Butel raised, and that is in attachment 2 to this. There's some interesting data in there, and one of them on page 1041 talked about reviewing various health indicators in the city. And the last paragraph says, for all the remaining indicators, composite score, education, housing burden, linguistic isolation, low birth weight, poverty, and unemployment, table B2 makes it particularly clear that tracks 5, 6, and 7 in southern and eastern Benicia consistently rank less favorably than the western and northwestern portions of the city. And I think that's just interesting. If not, I don't want to call it anecdotal information, but I think when we talk about variations in health impacts in the community, as well as income distribution, that this talks about the real difference between communities in the south and eastern part of Benicia compared to the north and western portions. And then the last question I had is on page 1051, and it was figure B17. It talked about distribution of measured hourly CO concentration at the Air District's Benicia monitoring station. And it says he took measurements between April 2007 and December 2008. And my only question is, why didn't you stop taking measurements in 2008? Maybe you don't know the answer to that question, but
unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that last question of why that stopped. That was just over a year-long campaign in the city of Benicia. I can follow up with you to see if I can get an answer just get some.
Well, I would just be curious if you're continuing to do these kinds of monitoring after 2008. It's a Air District monitoring site separate from what we're talking about tonight.
Not to my knowledge, we have not had any other Air District monitoring sites after the data that was provided in this.
Okay. Other questions for the staff? Vice Mayor Campbell.
Okay. We're gonna, it looks like we're gonna get one over by the Fire Museum. This is good. And we've got one out west of or east of the refinery. I have a problem with that one. I mentioned it before, when the winds blow to the west, it won't catch anything from the refinery that's blowing into the city. Like, for example, what's going on right now this week. So I think we need more air monitors. how many more do you think would be enough to get a good gauge of what's coming into Benicia from south of us, as well as, from the Valero refinery, because you've got some blind spots in there. So just an estimate. I don't think we need, a dozen of them at the same time. I think 2 of them aren't going to be enough to really give a good read of what's going on in the neighborhoods. So you've got, analysis of Benicia. What do you think?
So at this time, I know this is a common question that does come up of, how we need more monitoring, we need more information. And right now, the current focus is just for us to get this first one installed. And at this time, the fees that have been allocated to install this monitor would only provide enough funding for this one station at this time. Now, there was something that was brought up earlier today as in regards to potentially using fines from Benicia. I can't really speak to that until those conversations are had with the district and with Valero. That could potentially be another way for us to provide monitors to the community. I can't commit to that right now, but I just wanted to say that as to answer the question of having additional monitors in Benicia, I think there's potentially an opportunity to discuss having that through supplemental.
Okay,
funds.
well, I hate to try and pin you down, but yeah, it was mentioned that there may be some fines, and maybe this time, we'll get some money for them. Maybe we could find another couple spots. We've, I guess, got 28 left. We had 29 to start with, and we did 1. But again, the question I'm asking is, to get a decent view of what is, in the air in Benicia, there has to be at least technically a reasonable number that you can given the, what you have is you have the air monitoring, you have at least some also, sampling done. I'm not asking for it to be exact, but I do assume that at least 1, maybe 2 more air monitors would be something to consider. Not, I'm guessing 10, but just roughly to cover, the rest of Benicia, just a ballpark number. Doesn't have to be specific. There's no guarantee we're going to get any money. There's no guarantee of much of anything. But, this is something which for me, Benicia is the triad what we need. We have to have monitors around like the fence line and all over the refinery. We have to have mobile monitors if there's an emergency. And the one thing which came out tonight to some degree was we really don't know what's going on in a lot of neighborhoods. And for example, that might have helped Valero if they could say, oh yeah, we had a leak, but there were no signs that there were any volatile organics in any of the neighborhoods. Yay. But we don't have that right now. So that's why I'm asking just roughly, how many do you think we would need?
Well, it is difficult for me to answer at this time. I would say at least 1 more would be helpful for us to, like you said, to help complete the triad. And there have been some indications on the western portion of Benicia, more west of the southwest side, that would be of interest to take a look at that. Now, I know there's been interest to have monitors, or at least have the first monitor put up in a neighborhood in Southampton. And the reason that we have just, not the same, it was our decision, but based on just the analysis that we had done, is that while there might be some times where pollutants or emissions would be measured from various sources, not just from Valero, that the predominant occurrence of these pollutants, because of just the topography, would actually land down in the southwest portion of Benicia. So that too went into the decision for having, in addition to not only the analysis but the discussion with the community, to have that monitor located in the downtown portion of Benicia.
not to put words in your mouth, but then maybe one in sort of the Southampton Hills area might be a good idea, and then maybe one in the sort of southwest side of Benicia. Maybe that's all we,
Well, I will say that
down. I just,
yeah.
There's maybe at most two more, and we might actually be good. It sounds like me.
Okay, thank you. Other comments on this item? Have, Mr. Moderator, have we received any other additional public comments from anyone waiting to speak to this item?
No, we have not, Mayor Young.
Okay, and Ms. Wolf, we have received nothing?
No, we have not, Mary Ann.
Okay, then I'm looking for a motion and a second.
Move to approve.
Second.
All right, Ms. Wolf, please call the roll.
Council members Campbell,
Yes, and I want to thank, the Air District has had a rough earlier part of the meeting, but I want to thank them vociferously for what they've done.
Margaret Spada,
Yes.
Masensky,
Yes.
Strawbridge.
Yes, and I'd like to thank Chief Chadwick for all of his patience and guidance through this process. I know it was a lot, so thank you, Chief. And yes.
And Mary Ann.
Yes, motion passes. And that completes the consent calendar portion of the agenda. We move now to the business items, and that is 15A, street and roadway update. This